I had been living in the shadows of my own life for far too long, letting the people around me dictate my worth, my happiness, and even my future. But the moment I decided to reclaim my life, everything shifted. I had been broken by betrayal and disappointment so many times, yet each time I found the strength to rise again. But this time, my rebirth wasn't about just surviving, it was about building something greater, something they would never see coming. The decision to hide my wealth wasn't a rash one, it was calculated, deliberate, and born out of necessity. In the past, I had made the mistake of trusting too easily, of believing that people who smiled at me, who called me their friend, truly had my best interests at heart. But I was wrong. I had given too much of myself, too much of my success, only to watch as those closest to me used it against me, trying to tear me down. I had been naive, thinking that kindness and generosity would be met with the same. But that's not how the world worked. I had spent years building my empire, silent, unassuming, with no one knowing just how successful I had become. And yet, when the people I loved the most found out, they tried to take it all. They tried to manipulate, betray, and use me for their own benefit, all while pretending to be my allies. When I realized what they were doing, when I saw the true faces of the people I had trusted, I knew I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let them destroy everything I had worked for, everything I had earned. But here's the thing, revenge doesn't always require action. Sometimes, the best way to make people regret their actions is by simply watching them destroy themselves while you stay one step ahead. And that's exactly what I did. I chose to hide my wealth, to make them think they had won, to make them believe that I was just as naive as I had once been. But in reality, I had planned every move. I knew exactly how to make them fall apart. As they gossiped about me, schemed behind my back, and plotted their next steps to try to steal my success, I watched silently. I watched as their greed, their jealousy, and their insecurities tore them apart. They thought they had me figured out, thought they had me trapped. But the truth was, they never knew what I was capable of. I was no longer the person who would let them control me, no longer the person who needed them to survive. I was reborn, stronger, wiser, and ready to watch as they dug their own graves. At first, I was overwhelmed with emotions, anger, frustration, and betrayal. It felt like I had lost everything, like I had been abandoned by the people I had trusted. But then, something inside me clicked. I realized that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. This was my opportunity to take control, to turn the tables, and to rise above the lies they had tried to feed me. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. That would give them the satisfaction of seeing me react. No, my rebirth would come in silence. I would make my move when the time was right, when their greed and envy had blinded them so much that they had already begun to unravel. I would be the one standing in the end, watching as they turned on each other, all while I built something even more powerful, more secure than I had ever imagined. They thought they had won, but I was just getting started. This was not the end of my story. This was only the beginning. And soon, they would realize that they had underestimated me in every way. They would regret their actions, and I would be there, waiting, watching, silently enjoying the fruits of my own strategy. This is the story of my rebirth, a story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. It's a story of watching those who once thought they could control me self-destruct, while I quietly rise above it all. My story begins with trust, a trust that I had placed in the people I loved, the people I thought would never hurt me. It begins with the belief that when you give your heart, when you offer your loyalty, people will reciprocate. I was wrong. The first betrayal hit me quietly, a whisper that I brushed aside as nothing more than a misunderstanding. I had always been the kind of person who believed in second chances, in forgiveness. But now I see that my forgiving nature was nothing more than a weakness that people took advantage of. The man I had once trusted with my future, my partner in everything, was the first to reveal his true intentions. We had started from nothing, built a life together brick by brick, and I had always believed in us. But when he saw the success I was building on my own, when he saw the empire I was quietly creating without his help, something inside him shifted. He didn't want to stand by my side and share the fruits of our labor. No, he wanted it all. He wanted the credit. He wanted the power that came with the life we had built. But he didn't know how to build it himself. So, he began to undermine me, slowly and quietly, until I couldn't ignore it any longer. It started with small acts, small lies that piled up until they became impossible to ignore. He would act as though he supported my goals, my ambitions, but behind my back, he was telling me I needed to slow down, that my success was taking too much of his time, too much of our energy. It didn't take long for him to begin acting like the success I had worked for was as much his as mine, that he deserved a larger share of the credit for everything I had built. It was subtle at first. A few well-placed comments, a few seemingly innocent suggestions. He'd tell me how to invest my money, how to manage the business, how to make smarter decisions. But every time I listened to him, every time I took his advice, it only served to take me further from my goals. I was making decisions based on his manipulation, believing that he had my best interests at heart. The more I listened, the more I realized he was only interested in his own gain, in controlling what was mine. And then, when the business was on the verge of true success, that's when the real betrayal came. I had spent years building something that was just mine, something I could call my own, and I had every intention of keeping it that way. But the moment I discovered his infidelity, I realized how foolish I had been. It wasn't just about his physical betrayal. It wasn't about the lies he had told me, about the late nights and the excuses. It was about the realization that, from the beginning, he had never seen me as an equal partner. I had been nothing more than a stepping stone, a way for him to get what he wanted. He didn't care about me. He didn't care about the business. He cared about the power and control that came with being beside someone who was successful. And when he saw that I was doing better than he ever could, he decided to play dirty. I found out about the affair not through him, but through a friend. A casual remark made at a dinner party. "He's been spending a lot of time with her lately," my friend had said, as if it was a casual observation. But something in her voice told me there was more to it. I confronted him that night, expecting him to deny it, to lie his way out of it, as he always did. But this time, he didn't even try to hide it. The way he looked at me, cold, detached, almost as if he was daring me to be angry, to be hurt, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't sorry. He didn't care. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, as if those words could ever make up for the years of manipulation, the months of deceit, the lies that had built up between us. "I was just looking for something more, and I found it." Those words struck me harder than anything else he could have said. I had been looking for love, for partnership, for trust, but I had never found it. Instead, I had found a man who was more interested in taking what wasn't his, who thought that my success was his to control. And it wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything that came with it. The emotional neglect, the constant undermining, the manipulation that had seeped into every corner of our life together. But even then, I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know how to let go. I stayed because I was afraid of being alone, afraid that my success would mean nothing without him by my side. I had allowed his presence to become my identity, to become intertwined with who I was, and it terrified me to think that I could lose everything, not just him, but the version of myself that I had built with him. Months passed, and things went back to a semblance of normal. We went through the motions. He would apologize, I would forgive, and we would try to move forward. But in the back of my mind, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The cracks that had formed were too deep to repair. I wasn't just disappointed in him, I was disappointed in myself for allowing it to go on for so long, for letting myself believe that things would get better if I just tried harder, if I just loved him enough. The final straw came when I realized that not only had he been cheating, but he had also been siphoning money from our business, using it for his own personal gain, hiding it in accounts I hadn't known about. He had been manipulating me for years, and I had let him. I had believed in the lie that he was on my side, that we were building something together, but the truth was, he had always been building it for himself. I could no longer ignore it. I could no longer stand by and watch him destroy everything I had worked for. That's when I made my choice. I chose to step away, not just from him, but from everything that he had tainted. I chose freedom. I chose to take control of my life, my wealth, and my future. But this time, I wasn't going to let him take anything from me. I hid my wealth. I made sure that when he thought he had won, when he thought he could continue to play me for a fool, he would discover that he had already lost. After everything, I had to face a difficult truth. I was not the person I thought I was. For so long, I had let others define my worth, my actions, and my happiness. I had given my love, my time, and my resources to people who saw me as nothing more than a tool to further their own ambitions. I had lived my life in a way that was built on the expectations of others, believing that I needed validation to feel fulfilled. But that time was over. I didn't know exactly where to start, but I knew I had to start somewhere. The first step was simple, though difficult. I had to let go. I had to let go of the guilt, the anger, the disappointment, and the attachment to my past. The weight of all those emotions had been holding me down, making it impossible to breathe, impossible to move forward. I had allowed myself to be defined by others for far too long, and now it was time to free myself. I didn't need anyone's approval to be successful, to be happy, to be whole. It was something I had to learn, something I had to prove to myself, not to anyone else. And so, I took a deep breath, and with each exhale I released the old version of myself. The woman who had been afraid to step into her own power, who had been afraid of what others would think, was gone. And in her place was a woman who understood her own worth, a woman who knew that her success was hers to control, and hers alone. The first practical step I took was to distance myself from the people who had been part of my old life, those who had betrayed me or had supported my manipulation without question. I knew it wasn't enough just to walk away from him, from the business, from the lies. I had to clear my entire life of anyone or anything that had been complicit in my past. I started by cutting ties with the people who had allowed the betrayal to go unnoticed, those who had known about his actions but had said nothing. I didn't need them in my life anymore. I didn't need anyone who had been a part of the toxicity that had once surrounded me. I needed people who supported my growth, my transformation, and my dreams. It was hard at first. There were moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, when I missed the comfort of familiar faces. But I realized that the comfort I was seeking wasn't true peace. It was the kind of peace that came from suppressing my own voice, from turning a blind eye to the truth. I then turned inward, realizing that the key to my transformation was not just cutting off toxic people, but also healing myself from within. The emotional scars, the self-doubt, the guilt. I had to address all of them if I wanted to truly move forward. I enrolled in therapy, seeking help from someone who could guide me through the healing process, who could help me unravel the layers of pain and betrayal that I had buried for so long. Talking about my feelings was hard at first. I had always kept my pain inside, too afraid to share it with anyone, but I realized that by keeping it all locked up, I was only giving the pain more power. The more I opened up, the more I began to understand the choices I had made, and the less power the pain held over me. I also focused on rebuilding my financial foundation. As part of my decision to hide my wealth, I knew I needed to secure my future. I took control of my finances in a way I never had before. I reached out to financial advisors, set up new accounts, and made sure that my wealth was protected. For the first time, I saw the full scope of what I had built, and I realized that I could create even more. The fear of losing everything, of being left with nothing, no longer held me captive. I was now in control. I could not allow anyone, least of all Ethan or his cronies, to take what was mine. While I focused on securing my financial future, I also began to invest in my personal growth. I took up hobbies that I had neglected in the past: painting, reading, and learning new skills. I had always been so focused on the business and on maintaining a perfect image for the world that I had forgotten how to simply enjoy life. I had forgotten how to do things for myself, to find joy in the small moments that didn't involve achieving something for someone else. I started traveling again, taking trips to places I had always dreamed of visiting. These trips weren't about escaping, but about reconnecting with myself, about realizing how much life there was to experience when I wasn't held back by my past. But more than anything, I worked on my mindset. I had spent so many years believing that I wasn't enough, that I had to prove myself to others. I had to remind myself daily that my worth was not tied to their opinions, not tied to how much they thought I should give or how much they believed I should sacrifice. I was enough. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I was worthy of all the success and happiness I was creating for myself. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old doubts crept in, when I questioned whether I was making the right choices, when I thought about how much easier it would be to go back to what I had known, to the life where I was always playing second fiddle to someone else's desires. But I stayed strong. I reminded myself why I had made the decision to leave, why I had chosen to embrace my power, my worth. Every day became an act of self-empowerment. I built a life that was centered around me, not around the idea of being someone's partner, someone's support system, someone's backup plan. I built a life that was centered around my success, my happiness, and my dreams. And with each step I took, I felt more and more at peace with the person I was becoming. It was in the quiet moments, in the reflection of my decisions, that I truly understood the depth of my transformation. I was no longer the woman who feared the opinions of others. I was no longer the woman who lived in the shadows of her own potential. I was the woman who had chosen freedom. And that freedom was mine to define. Just as I thought I had everything under control, just as I thought I could finally move on from the people and the life that had once defined me, the universe had other plans. The decisions I made, the steps I took to ensure my freedom, were not without consequences. The people who had once been close to me, those who had either aided or turned a blind eye to the betrayal, weren't going to let me walk away without a fight. They had grown accustomed to my success, to the power I had provided, and they would stop at nothing to regain what they thought was theirs. It started with the whispers. At first, they were just rumors, harmless, inane gossip that I tried to ignore. But the more I heard, the more I realized that these whispers were designed to chip away at the new life I had worked so hard to build. Ethan's voice, though distant, was still loud enough to be heard through the people we both knew. He had a story to tell, one that painted me as the villain in our narrative, one that suggested I was the one who had abandoned everything we built together. The betrayal was no longer just about him and me. It had become a public spectacle. I had hoped that the people who mattered, the ones who truly understood who I was, would see through it. But I was wrong. They too had been tainted by the lies, by the poison of his words, and it started to feel like I was losing the ground I had fought so hard to secure. I was no longer just fighting for my future, for my success. Now I was fighting for my reputation, for the image of myself that I had worked so hard to redefine. The first confrontation came when one of my closest business partners, someone I had trusted, someone who had been with me through the early days of my success, approached me with a proposition. It was supposed to be an innocent conversation, a casual meeting over lunch, but the tension in the room was palpable from the moment we sat down. "You've been acting a little distant lately," he said, his tone more pointed than I had ever heard. "People are starting to talk. I think you need to set the record straight. The rumors about you, about Ethan, they're getting out of hand." I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about him. It was about the whispers that had begun to invade every corner of my life. I had been prepared for this, but I still wasn't ready. I had spent so many years letting others control the narrative, letting them tell me what was right and wrong. I had hoped that when I finally walked away, when I took control of my own life, the past would stay in the past. But I was wrong. "I don't need to set anything straight," I replied, my voice steadied despite the storm of emotions raging within me. "I don't owe anyone an explanation. Not to Ethan, not to you, and certainly not to anyone who's been listening to those lies." He looked at me, clearly taken aback by my response. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the uncertainty of whether he should stand by me or side with the people who were painting me as the villain. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low. "If you don't clear this up, people will think you're hiding something. And when that happens, it's hard to come back from." I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, I felt the full impact of the battle I had walked into. I was not just fighting for my independence. I was fighting for my identity, for the very essence of who I had become. "You don't get it," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not hiding anything. I've worked too damn hard to get here, to get to this point, to let anyone take it away from me. Not him, not anyone. If they want to believe the lies, that's on them. But I'm not going to waste any more of my time trying to convince them." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air between us, and in that silence, I realized something. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had already made my decision, and I was prepared to stand by it no matter what the cost. But as the days passed, the pressure mounted. The rumors didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was the accusations. People were starting to believe what Ethan had said, and they were starting to question my integrity, my worth. I received anonymous messages, emails accusing me of things I hadn't done, of lying, of manipulating people to get what I wanted. They all sounded like Ethan's voice, like his words echoed through the anonymous letters and phone calls. They were designed to make me doubt myself, to make me question my every move. And for a moment I did. The old doubts crept in, and I had to fight them off, just as I had done when I first realized the betrayal. It would have been easy to fight back, to confront Ethan directly, to show the world that I was the victim, to expose him for what he had done. But I knew that wasn't the way forward. I had already made that mistake once. I wasn't going to let anger and revenge dictate my future. Instead, I did what I had done all along. I stayed silent. I focused on my work, on the empire I was building, and I refused to let their lies derail me. But in the silence, I watched. I watched as the people who had supported Ethan started to turn on each other. I watched as their greed, their jealousy, and their insecurities tore them apart. Ethan thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. But what he didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this. I had already anticipated their moves. I had already planned for their attempts to sabotage me. I knew they would try to manipulate the narrative to make me look like the villain. But I also knew that eventually they would destroy themselves. And they did. One by one, they began to unravel. Ethan's new alliances fell apart as lies were exposed. His financial mismanagement came to light, and the very people who had once supported him were now distancing themselves from his toxic influence. The more he tried to cover up his mistakes, the more his actions came back to haunt him. He had built his empire on the backs of lies, and it was crumbling. And as I watched from the sidelines, I realized something incredible. I had won. Not because of anything I had done to them, but because of everything they had done to themselves. Their jealousy, their greed, their manipulation. It had all led to their destruction. I had been reborn, not through revenge, but through the silent strength of my choices. I had hidden my wealth. I had hidden my true power, and I had watched them destroy themselves. The only thing they had succeeded in was exposing their true nature. It's funny how life works. The people who thought they were controlling the narrative, the ones who thought they could manipulate and deceive their way to the top, were the same ones who ended up buried beneath the weight of their own actions. They thought they could break me, humiliate me, take what was mine, but they underestimated one thing: me. I wasn't going to let their games define my future. As I watched them scramble, watching Ethan and his allies turn on each other in their desperation, I realized something profound. I had already won. Not by playing their game, but by refusing to be a part of it. I had chosen to walk away, to take control of my own destiny, and in doing so, I had crafted a life they could never touch. The first moment of justice came when Ethan's financial mismanagement was uncovered. It wasn't a coincidence that his deceitful dealings were exposed when they were. I had done my research. I had positioned myself strategically, and when the right time came, I made sure the truth came to light. Ethan, in all his arrogance, thought he could use others to prop up his failing empire. He had never considered that the people he betrayed would eventually get their revenge, not by violence, not by confrontation, but through the quiet, unstoppable power of truth. His financial ruin was swift and catastrophic. The very people he had swindled, the ones he had manipulated into supporting his lies, quickly turned their backs on him when the truth was revealed. And it wasn't just his business that began to collapse. The personal relationships he had carefully crafted to maintain his image, the ones that had helped him manipulate me and so many others, began to fall apart. His so-called friends started distancing themselves from him, and his so-called loyal allies became the first to betray him when they realized they could no longer benefit from his connections. The cracks in his life that I had once seen as tiny fractures had now become deep, insurmountable chasms. His world was crumbling, and I was nowhere near the wreckage. I had no part in it. But as much as I reveled in his downfall, I was careful. I didn't take pleasure in his misery. I had already let go of the need for revenge. His self-destruction had been inevitable. I hadn't even needed to expose him fully. His own actions had done that for me. I had simply stayed silent, stayed out of his way, and let him dig his own grave. The real victory, though, came when I saw how his downfall affected those around him. The people who had sided with him, those who had tried to destroy me, each one of them was left facing the consequences of their choices, their greed, their dishonesty, had made them complicit in his actions, and now they had to pay the price. No one was left untouched. They thought they could turn on me, use me, and take everything I had. But in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. Meanwhile, I stood firm. I didn't need to fight for what was mine. I didn't need to argue, to plead, to prove anything to anyone. The truth had already spoken for me. I had already built the life I wanted, a life that didn't rely on anyone else's validation. I had chosen to hide my wealth, to let them think they had outsmarted me, and in the process, I had ensured that my success was safe, secure, and untouchable. It was a simple, quiet victory that they would never see coming. My empire continued to grow. I didn't look back anymore. The people who once doubted me, the people who once tried to tear me down, were nothing more than distant memories. I had moved beyond them, beyond the lies and betrayal that had once clouded my vision. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was transforming it. I had taken control of my narrative, and no one was going to rewrite it for me. I wasn't just financially successful. I was successful in the most important way. I had found peace. The woman I had once been, the one who lived for the approval of others, the one who allowed herself to be used, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood her own worth, someone who had the power to shape her own future. But perhaps the most powerful feeling of all was the realization that I didn't need anyone to validate my success. I had built this life on my terms, by my choices, and the peace I had found came not from the absence of conflict, but from the strength I had gained in navigating it. I had learned that true power lies not in dominating others, but in maintaining control of yourself, in refusing to let others define your path. The final moment of justice came when Ethan, realizing the extent of his losses, tried to approach me one last time. He came to me, desperation in his eyes, hoping for one final chance to make amends, to reclaim whatever shred of dignity he thought he had left. But I didn't need to hear his apologies. I didn't need to listen to his pleas. The truth was already clear, and it had already sealed his fate. "I don't need you anymore," I told him calmly, watching as the man who had once been my partner in everything crumbled before me. "You never understood what we were building. I did it on my own. And that's where I'm staying. On my own." His face fell, but I didn't feel satisfaction in his defeat. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at him. It was about understanding that I was free. I had chosen myself, and in that choice, I had everything I needed. The world he had tried to control was now mine to shape. And as I stood there, watching him walk away for the last time, I realized that I had finally won. Not because I had taken anything from him, but because I had let go of the need to take anything at all. I had taken control of my life, of my happiness, and in doing so, I had created a future that no one, no matter how powerful or manipulative, could ever take away from me. I look back now, and it feels surreal. The woman I was just a few years ago feels like someone I barely recognize. She was naive, trusting, and afraid of being alone, afraid of not being enough, afraid of losing everything. But the woman I've become is different. She is powerful, self-assured, and unapologetically independent. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been worth every step. When I first walked away, I didn't know what to expect. I was filled with fear and uncertainty, unsure of what my future would look like without the life I had spent so long building. But I soon realized that the future wasn't something I had to worry about. It was something I could create. I didn't need to wait for someone else's permission to be happy, to be successful, to be whole. I learned to trust myself, to listen to the quiet voice inside me that had always known what I was capable of, but had been drowned out by the noise of others. I had spent so many years building a life for someone else, accommodating their needs, their desires, their expectations. I thought that by sacrificing my own happiness, I could keep the peace. I could make them happy. But in the end, I realized that the only person I had ever needed to make happy was myself. And when I finally understood that, when I embraced my own worth and stopped letting others define me, everything began to change. The business I had once built for two was now entirely mine, and I had grown it beyond what I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the wealth or the success. It was about the freedom I had created for myself. I was no longer beholden to anyone, no longer trapped by anyone else's ambitions. My empire wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of my independence, my strength, and my ability to control my own destiny. I had taken back everything they had tried to take from me, and I had built it all on my own terms. But the most incredible thing about my journey wasn't the success, the wealth, or even the freedom. It was the peace I found within myself. I no longer had to fight for validation. I no longer had to prove my worth to anyone. I didn't need their approval to know that I was enough. I had learned to love myself, to accept myself, flaws and all. I had stopped being afraid of being alone, because I knew that I was never truly alone. I had myself, and that was enough. The relationships that had once held me back were now a thing of the past. The people who had betrayed me, who had tried to manipulate and control me, were no longer part of my life. And it wasn't just because they had wronged me, it was because I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my peace. I had surrounded myself with people who supported me, who lifted me up, who respected me for the person I had become. And in return, I had learned to give those same people the respect and loyalty they deserved. But not all relationships had been lost. In fact, I had found new, deeper connections, ones that weren't based on expectations or need, but on mutual respect and love. I had found people who saw me for who I truly was, who appreciated me for the strength and resilience I had developed. These relationships were built on equality, trust, and shared growth. They were the kind of relationships I had always dreamed of, and they became a source of comfort and strength. And yes, love found its way back into my life, but this time, it was different. I wasn't seeking someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for validation or someone to fix me. I had already fixed myself. Instead, love was something that added to my life, not something that defined it. The relationship I found wasn't about dependency. It was about partnership. We supported each other, we encouraged each other, and most importantly, we respected each other's individuality. I had learned that love isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding someone who can stand beside you as equals and build something together. There were moments when I questioned my decisions, moments when the past threatened to resurface, when doubts crept in, and when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But every time that happened, I reminded myself of the woman I had become, of the strength I had built. I reminded myself that the woman I had once been, the one who let others control her life, the one who let fear dictate her decisions, was gone. She had been replaced by someone who knew her worth, who knew her power, and who would never again settle for less than she deserved. I had learned some invaluable lessons along the way, the most important one being this: your life is yours to create. No one can take that from you unless you allow them to. People will come and go, opportunities will rise and fall, but the one thing that you will always have is yourself. And if you choose to love yourself, to value yourself, to respect yourself, no one can ever take that away. Now, as I look at the life I've built, I see it for what it is: a testament to my resilience, my strength, and my unwavering belief in myself. I have everything I need. I am everything I need. And for the first time, I can honestly say that I am proud of the woman I have become. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the business, or the revenge. It was about the journey, the transformation, and the peace that comes with choosing yourself above all else. I will never stop growing, never stop evolving, but the woman I am now is someone I can be proud of, someone who has finally found the life she deserves. And as I stand here today, looking out at the future, I know that whatever comes next, I am ready. Because I no longer need anyone else to define me. I define myself. And that is my greatest victory.